Hello, good evening, everyone, and a happy new year. Tonight we have a special guest for the first business ethics class, uh, which is actually the fourth to the last class in this term. And our guest, Father Cesar Santos, used to be a professor, lecturer at the University of Asia and the Pacific. No? He's been very generous and kind enough to be part of our business ethics course. And he'll be discussing the importance, the role of spirituality and religion in the ethical training and development of business professionals like you. And to tell more about himself, briefly about his experience in the university and outside university, we have with us tonight Father Cesar. Thank you, Father Cesar. Cesar, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Zen, for inviting me, and hello, everybody. Happy New Year. I'm Father Cesar Santos. As Zen told you, for a number of years, actually about 26 years, I've been connected with the University of Asia and the Pacific. Um, I was part of the school chaplaincy, and then also I taught um, uh, theology of the creed, theology of the sacraments, and also moral theology during my stay there. And I am delighted to be with you tonight.
Yes, Father Cesar, one of the questions we would like to ask you is about, how religion affects business ethics.
Okay, good. Actually, that is is a um, is a good question to begin our discussion on this business ethics, because the way I understand religion is that it is that like worldview that gives a person an all-encompassing understanding of what reality is. I mean, not only insofar as who he is concerned, but also his relationships with other persons and his relationship with the world. So, religion gives you that all-encompassing view, and therefore also it impinges on the way you understand what is good. After all, we're all pursuing what is good, and business exists to pursue what is good. Now, the question is, what exactly is that good that I'm pursuing, and so when you speak of an all-encompassing good, it's like the absolute ultimate good that you are pursuing. So and that's what your religion gives you. I mean, for example, there are many religions that we know of. Some of them subscribe to the reality of an absolute transcendent good that that impinges on this changing world that we live in. But there are also other religions. Now you call them secular religions that see the absolute reality as only this this world related. Now, for example, a person can pursue just making money, wealth, as his absolute good, or a person can pursue power as an absolute good, or pleasure in whatever way you might want to understand pleasure as an absolute good. So there are many ways of conceiving that good, and definitely in a business enterprise, there's a culture that is created, in the work relationships, over and beyond the product that you're trying to market. There's a whole culture behind it, and definitely the way you perceive yourself and what you're here in this life for, and the good that you are called to pursue, not only in particular, but also an all-encompassing good. All of that has to do with one's religion in that sense. Religion being the worldview that a person um, might have insofar as his life and relationship with others is concerned. So it's really a very telling factor insofar as the creation of a business culture is concerned.
So you're saying, brother, in a certain sense, okay, business, I mean, religion has a place in business.
Yes, insofar as there is a culture in any business enterprise, and over and beyond the materiality of what the people might be doing or the product they might be producing, there's a spirit behind the whole business enterprise, and that depends on the way you view the world as a whole.
Hmm. Well, some people think that, okay, religion is something that you have to, well, keep out of the workplace because it doesn't have a place in the workplace, meaning it can interfere, it can even dampen, for instance, one's drive, especially for promotions, for profit, etc.
Well, yes, that's what you would usually understand as a fundamentalist way of looking at things, right? But the way I understand your question, and we want to answer your question, is that religion in a broader sense. I mean, it's the work culture that you want to create, and of course that depends in a large degree on the owners of the corporation or the board of directors of the corporation or the managers involved in the corporation, because they're the ones, for the most part, who provide what you might call the spirit, behind the workforce.
Mm-hmm. Well, in the University of Asia Pacific, you used to teach moral theology, Father, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So how can moral theology contribute to business ethics theory and practice?
Well, that's also an interesting, a point to discuss. Well, first of all, I'd like to clarify what I understand theology to mean, because when you say morals, the way well I understand morals is the absolute and unconditional value that a person may pursue in his actions. Okay, so whatever that absolute and unconditional value may be, well, that's the ethical value that he pursues in everything. I mean, I'm not speaking here of ethics in the sense of, this is good or bad. I'm talking of ethics as what delivers to a person his understanding of what is absolute and unconditional insofar as the goodness of his action is concerned. Okay. Now, when we speak of theology, from the Christian point of view, we are referring to an understanding of the world, yes, that engages reason, but has as its starting point what in the Catholic faith or the Christian faith we refer to as divine revelation, meaning to say, the starting point of theology is not the deliverances of reason insofar as reason tries to understand the world, but the starting point, because that would be philosophy. Okay, so precisely that's the difference between philosophy and theology. Philosophy makes use of the light of reason as its starting point, whereas theology makes use of the light of faith. Okay, which presupposes a personal divine intervention in the course of history, and which in the Christian faith we locate, in the God made man who is Jesus Christ, is the fullness of divine revelation. So that is the starting point, of theology, and that is the starting point of the Christian understanding, Catholic understanding of what the absolute good is. Now, insofar as moral theology is concerned, what gives the overarching view of the world and myself in relation to the world is its notion of man, okay? The way we understand man. And the Christian understanding of man is an imago Dei. Okay, so this is a revelation from the book of Genesis, chapter 2 or chapter 1, where the book of Genesis says that God made man unto his image and likeness. Okay, and of course um, this relates also. This is related to the Christian understanding of who God is, and in the Christian faith, we understand that God is love. Okay, He's not just a loving God, a God who loves, but He is love itself. And this essentially is what the mystery of the Trinity is all about. The mystery of God who, from all eternity, pours Himself out, everything that He has, and gives it to His only beloved Son, and from all eternity, the only beloved Son, welcomes the gift of love from the Father, everything that the Father has, meaning to say all the riches of divine life, and this giving and welcoming of the gift of divine life, or the divine substance, is who the Holy Spirit is. So this is the Christian um, uh, conception of the mystery of the Godhead, unto whom or unto which man has been created. So this brings about two fundamental um, um, uh, uh, points, regarding the nature of man. The first is that every man is a unique and unrepeatable individual. Okay, and someone who is valuable or lovable for his own sake. Meaning to say, each and every man made into God's image is valuable, not for his utility value. Okay, ultimately, he is not to be loved for his utility value, but he is to be loved, um, um, in his uniqueness and unrepeatability. Okay? For who he is, and not what he has or what he can deliver. Okay? And so that is fundamental for the Christian understanding of man. And then there's a second point here about man related to the first, and that is, man finds, or can only find, his unique and unrepeatable self, not through self-seeking, but through the sincere gift of himself to others. When you relate to other persons in this manner, meaning to say, I enter into a relationship with you, and my objective here is not what is in it for me, what is in this relationship for me, what can I get out of you, but it is to sincerely give myself to you. So these two fundamental principles in the understanding of man is very much related to the mystery of the Trinity, because each person of the Blessed Trinity is unique and unrepeatable. The Father is not the Son, and the Son is not the Holy Spirit. They are three different, unique individuals, and they are what they are insofar as they are related in that relationship of sincere self-giving and welcoming that they have with one another. Okay, so in other words, in the Blessed Trinity, what you have is the most absolute unity, because God is only one, in the most absolute diversity, because the three persons are distinct from one another. That's precisely what the mystery of the Trinity is, one God and three distinct persons. And this, of course, impacts insofar as human relationships are concerned, because the absolute good that encompasses all the other goods that human beings are called to pursue, is that uh, well, I I give myself to you, value you for what you are, and seek the good that you have. And that relationship is what you call, there's a term for that in theology, that's what you call communion. Okay? A relationship of unity that respects the diversity of each person. So, so those are two fundamental principles in the Christian understanding of man that flow from um, the mystery of the Trinity. But I'd like to add a third one, unless you have any other questions before I continue, because I'd like to also point out a third principle in the Christian understanding of man, and that man is a body person, meaning to say he's not a spirit um, jailed in a body, but he is a unitotality of body and soul. And this is very important, because part of the Christian faith is the mystery of the incarnation. That Jesus Christ, the second person of the Blessed Trinity, took on flesh. Okay, and so Jesus Christ is perfect God, because he's the second person of the Blessed Trinity, but he's also perfect man, because he assumed everything human except sin. Okay, and and Christ is only one. Okay, so he's not like a God who is jailed in his flesh, but he's just one Christ, um, with the two distinct natures. I mean, perfect God and perfect man, without mixing or mingling. The two of them. But rather, perfect God and perfect man in one person, who is the second person of Blessed Trinity made flesh. Now, this is very important in the Christian understanding of man, because you see, in the same way as the entire divinity of Christ, is revealed in his humanity. Okay, there's only one Christ, with two different natures. Well, there's only one man, composed of body and spiritual soul. Okay, and that's why the Christian understanding of man is not that he's an angel person, pure spirit jailed in a body, but he is a body person. In other words, the body represents the person. And this is very important, because when we speak of good, okay, because that's what we are pursuing, and that's what a business enterprise pursues. And for a Christian understanding of man, it's the primacy of the person that that gives you, the parameters, okay, in order to function as a business. So what we have here as the primary concern of any enterprise, okay, is the good of the person understood as a body person, meaning to say, a person is multidimensional. He has his physical, his emotional, psychic dimension, or his spiritual dimension. All of these have to be integrated in order to pursue the true good of the person in any endeavor that we might undertake, whether it's commercial or educational.
In previous sessions in our business ethics class, we've actually mentioned some related concepts and practical ideas related to the principles you mentioned. Number one, for instance, the importance of showing appreciation to each person. Precisely when we recognize the value of the person, one thing which managers would have to recognize also is that, well, each individual needs to be appreciated, and people have actually different languages of appreciation. Second idea is the idea of service. No, that for people really to be useful to the others, they have to serve, because otherwise there could be the tendency to focus on oneself and therefore ignore the others. No? Then lastly, the importance of precisely looking at the person not just as a physical being, but beyond it. I mean, there are other there are other dimensions like the emotional, uh, psychological, etc. So managers have to keep that in mind when it comes to taking good care of their people. Now, Father Cesar, one of the things which came to mind when you were discussing these principles was the following. Okay, those are very good principles, but perhaps many times the challenge among managers is well, how to make them, really useful in actual business life or work life. Because there are some industries, for instance, that are labeled as, perhaps naturally corrupt. Now, we won't mention which industries, no? But they would say that it's easier to be bad, perhaps, or it's easier to do the wrong thing rather than the right thing. So, how could these principles that we just mentioned help people actually choose what they ought to do, what they ought to choose, meaning uh, the ethical side of decisions.
Okay. Um, well, maybe we can start in this way. Um, you see, when we decide, what good to do, of course, there is an overarching view, that we take into consideration that unifies, all our efforts. And here, what I would say is one of the fundamental consequences, is to take into account the good of all the stakeholders, because all of them are persons, and all of them, we have to take into account the integral good, of all the stakeholders, say in a corporation, and this would involve, first of all, the customers you're trying to serve, because that's what the enterprise exists for. I mean, you produce products with a view to service, as you mentioned, through professionalism, and so the stakeholders would include your consumers. The stakeholders would include, of course, the workers in a corporation. And when I say workers, I mean everyone, from the board of directors to the cleaning staff of the corporation. And when I also say take into account their good, the good of the stakeholders, we don't only consider them as individuals, but also as individuals related to a community, say their families or the neighborhood they belong to, or even the country, that they belong to. I mean, a person in the Christian understanding of who man is somebody who's relational. Okay, so our relationships extend, beyond, the relationships that we have within the corporation, but also outside. And many times these relationships are like more primary, more important, like family, for example. Okay, um, or we might, for a believer, his relationship with God. How his work, impacts on his relationship with, his God, and how his work impacts in his relationship with his family members. So for a Christian, these are primary, um, you know, um, like conditions, that would be taken should be taken into account insofar as considering, well, what's the good that this work I am doing, what good does it bring about? Okay, so that's the first thing, to have a holistic understanding of really who are the stakeholders, of the company or of the business. And then it's January too, and I just read a summary of Pope Francis's message for the World Day of Peace. As you know, January 1st in the Catholic Church, and I think also in the UN, is celebrated as the World Day of Peace. Okay, so peace as like the primary and fundamental good. It begins the new year. That everybody should pursue. In the coming year, whatever endeavors they may have. So yeah, the World Day of Peace being held in January 1. That's significant, right? Like that's the like overarching good that any man, who understands the dignity of a person, um, should pursue, right? And so the popes have it's a tradition to deliver a message, for the World Day of Peace. And I just read a summary of what Pope Francis said. I still have to read the whole message, but I would like to relate what I read to the question, because insofar as the overarching good is concerned, what I think is universally valid, okay, and that holds for businesses, is to pursue, your work in the company in such a way that you contribute in your own small way to peace and harmony among men. Okay, I think that's universally acceptable. Peace and harmony. By the way, I'd like to make a comment on that, because actually there is an ideology very much in vogue, especially in the West, which is wokeism. I'm sure you've heard of that. Which views the most basic principle of dynamics, in the world, not insofar as peace and harmony, not in the terms of peace and harmony, but in the terms of conflict and contradiction and canceling out of the opposition. In other words, it's a power struggle. Okay, so perhaps it's not all that universal. Okay, but from a Christian point of view, at least, or those who subscribe to the conviction that the human person is unique and unrepeatable, and is called to find himself in a sincere gift of himself to others, which is the way we understand love. Okay, and this should be pursued in freedom. Okay, because only a person who possesses himself, who has mastery over himself, can truly make the sincere gift of himself over and above the passions and instincts that may, dominate, his feelings. Okay, so he's in sufficient control of himself, in sufficient possession of himself to, filter his emotions in such a way that when I, relate with you, what I have in mind is your integral good. Okay, and that I find myself in this relationship in the degree that I give myself sincerely to you as a person. Okay, so that's the overarching view. That in some small way, my company, my business enterprise contributes to the peace and harmony of men. Okay. Now, first of all, okay, when we speak of peace, and the Christian understanding of peace, by the way, okay, is from Saint Augustine. Peace is not so much the absence of war, the absence of conflict, the absence of contradiction, and the canceling out of your opponent. Something like a Darwinian view of the world, the struggle for the fittest. But peace is is understood in the Christian point, from the Christian point of view, as the tranquility of right order. Okay, so and by that, so it's relational. It's a relational, and it's a tranquility. It's a peace that's brought about by the fact that the ordering in the relationships is in place, according to reason. Okay, and and from the Christian point of view, also there are two kinds of peace. There's an inner peace, or peace in one's heart, it is from that peace in one's heart, that peace in our external relationships with other people or with the world around us. There's not a lot of talk about ecology today and respecting the beauty of nature. That order, insofar as external to me in my relationships with other people or with the world around me, springs from an origin, and that's peace in my heart. Okay, so that's very Christian. After all, our Lord said that the kingdom of heaven is primarily inside you. Okay, in our heart, when the love of God, when the Spirit of God, the Holy Spirit dwells in our heart and reigns in our heart. So, what I would say is that first of all, peace will obtain if there's a right relationship in one's heart with the fundamental, values that man should pursue. And what are these fundamental values insofar as Christianity is concerned? Which I would, propose, as universally acceptable. Well, these are truth, okay, goodness, and beauty. Okay, because this is who God is. God is truth. God is goodness itself. God is not only truthful. He is truth itself. God is not only good, but He's goodness itself. And God is not only beautiful. He is beauty itself. So anything that is true, that is noble, that is good, that is praiseworthy, that's the Christian God. And the right relationship in my heart with God, understood in that sense, that's the source of all peace. Okay, now, and then there will be peace in our relationships. It can also be based on truth, order, and beauty. Okay, again, Tagalog. So that the ethical good, is understood in a very large way with the lenses of beauty. Like in Tagalog, if something evil is done, in Tagalog you say masama ang ginawa, pangit ang ginawa niya, right? So it's equivalent to saying masama ang ginawa niya, meaning what he did was morally bad. But in Tagalog, people say pangit ang ginawa niya. That was ugly. I mean, spiritually ugly. And if somebody does something morally good and very good, in Tagalog, you would, approach it from the lens of beauty. Talagang maganda. Okay, ang ginawa niya. So there's that special sensibility of the moral good and the moral truth as something spiritually beautiful. Okay, so that's very understandable, by Filipino speakers. Okay, so let me give you an example of this. Okay, like I heard of this case. A person who works in a what do you call this again? IT firm. Okay, and this IT firm develops software, programs and platforms for business solutions. Okay, and they marketed a product which was pretty expensive, okay, and which was bought by several people with guarantee that this really works. And then one of the employees in this firm discovered that there were many glitches, that was not so, and of course, bringing that up to management would give a very bad name, to the company. So what this person did was that he talked first to his team leader, say, this is what I discovered, and it's there's proof for this. I'm thinking of bringing this up to the higher ups, but this is like dynamite, because this has so many consequences insofar as the name of the company is concerned, the finances of the company is concerned. So that was that person's dilemma. Do I come out up front and like the truth, right? And that's what's good and that's what's beautiful. Okay, so that's one example. Okay, Um, another um, another example I can give you here um, is there was another person. He was the not only country head, but he was the regional head, of a firm, right? With a number of people in the different like countries involved. He was regional, really, and in there was a problem, that cropped up, and this was their main office was leasing, office space, a lot of office space, okay, and for some reason it was overlooked, and it was expiring, um, they were faced with the possibility of looking at the new year with no office space to work in. Okay, so that was the problem, right? So the people in that country, informed the regional head, and then the regional head informed, the person, the office overall in charge, all over the world, because it was multinational. And so somebody from the head office came, to the country, and the regional head came here and said, okay, who's at fault here? In other words, he wanted heads to roll. Okay, because it was a simple fact, matter. It was an oversight, and he wanted heads to roll. Okay, who is the one at fault here? Now, the regional head, he said, the blame's on me. But no, but I'm not talking about you. Who here in this group, in this particular country, is at fault here? Because he wanted to apply the sanctions. And then the regional head said, no, I'm the regional head. The buck stops, with me. So if there's something wrong here, I'm the one, and I have to solve it. And so the person in top was surprised. Are you sure you want to take responsibility for this? And he said, yes, I'm responsible. He says, okay, but remember, if you don't solve this problem, such and such a date, you're out. He says, yes, okay, I'm out. And of course, it was a daring move, right? And so, what did this guy do? He got the people in the country together, and he said, "Okay, this is our problem. I don't care who is, who is at fault here. We have a problem to solve. So let's all work together and let's solve it." To make the long story short, it was solved, right? And then the guy, he explained, why he took that tack, because yes, there's the responsibility really ended in him, right? Although that was a small detail that you can say was beyond, it was not necessary for him to enter into, because that would be like details, too much detail. But then he said, if I pursued, that line of, who's to blame here, I wouldn't have solved the problem, and we would, yes, heads would roll, but then the company would suffer. So here's a guy who, was courageous enough to take it upon himself, not so much because, well, he was at fault, because maybe you can argue that was not within his, that's too small a thing to, but, he was looking at the overall good, integral good, okay? Not only of the whole international, multinational company, but, the good of the employees, the good of the people that were supposed to serve. It was an overall vision. And he was there for that as regional head, to look after the common good. That's a term in moral theology that we use, the common good, the good of each and every stakeholder in the game, and so, everybody was motivated by his example, by his leadership, and they really moved heaven and earth, to solve it, and they solved it. So that's one example, of peace and harmony, like truth, beauty, and good in action. Okay, based on those principles of the Christian conception of man as unique, unrepeatable, free, responsible. Okay, so going back to to the speech of Pope Francis, the message of Pope Francis, there were three basic ideas that he said he would like to propose, for reflection for January 1st, 2022. Okay, because the goal here is to build peace, construct peace. Okay, understanding peace in that sense. No?
Yeah, peace definitely is something which is needed even in the corporate setting.
Of course, tranquility of right order. And so he mentioned three words or concepts: dialogue, communication. Because this is a shared project. To use that word, it's a shared project. So everybody's involved, all the stakeholders involved. So it's very important for dialogue, among all the stakeholders. So openness. Like I remember one case here. This was he was in, I'd say, middle management, right? And he was really concerned. One of his desires was to really work for the good of the whole corporation. And he brought up some things with his immediate boss, right? With a desire to really contributing to the company. For some reason, the higher boss didn't like his suggestion, and so he brought it up to the higher ups. Okay, with a negative spin. And so the person who made that suggestion or that remark or pointed out this matter, I don't know what it was, was called to the higher office and reprimanded for what he did. Now, this person felt, first of all, misunderstood. Okay, and and of course it was demotivating for him because he was motivated with all the good intentions and he saw his point, but I don't know for what reason it didn't sit well with the immediate boss, and so it went to the higher boss with this spin, right? And he got a flack. He got a he got a dressing down for this, and it was very demotivating. He felt misunderstood. That okay, if they just want me to comply with the systems and just passively, follow what I'm told without giving my my own insights, then so be it. I'll be safe, right? His own personal security that he was looking after. So that's an example of dialogue, right? Being open to the suggestions of others, even though it may be a new creative idea that might not be the usual way things were done, right? So the Pope mentioned dialogue. And then the Pope also mentioned education in freedom and responsibility and development. So because here, each person is free, and if you want him to be responsible, then he has to exercise his freedom responsibly with all the creativity, and that's where the word development comes in, that he's capable of. So instead of working like a machine, brainlessly, like just following orders, of course the person doesn't feel fulfilled because person's free and wants to be creative, wants to have his own unique contribution, to the overall maybe community or enterprise that he's involved in. So that's the other thing that the Pope mentioned, education in freedom, responsibility, and development. This is very interesting. I'll read more, on what the Pope says about that. And then, yes, the third thing that he mentioned was looking at work and considering work from the viewpoint of the dignity of the human person. In other words, work is there. Of course, when I work, I make products, I transform matter, I transform the external world. But when I work, I'm also transforming myself. Okay, so that's what the Pope said. Foster an understanding of work that is in keeping with the dignity of each and every person. So these, I think, are universally valued values that apply to any business enterprise or any community for that matter.
Just as a follow-up, Father, we mentioned about the importance of doing work well, finding meaning in work. And I think for most of the executives, especially in this course, the problem many times is too much work. And it's easy to forget the fact that work can actually be self-enhancing. It can improve. Well, it can be a way of improving oneself. No? Because one is simply flooded with work, so many constraints. No? So how can one make good use of this fundamental idea mentioned there?
Okay, maybe I'll just respond to that question by giving an example from a conversation I had with somebody who is again in charge of a very large group of people. Okay, runs to the hundreds. So he has some team leaders, for him, and he's the overall in charge of these different team leaders. And there was one team leader who came to him and told him that he would like to cut his work hours. I don't know if they were working on a 6-day every week basis, but just for the sake of example, he said, "Well, I'd like to work." This is just an example, okay? Like 5 days a week, and I'd like to work 8 hours every day because I feel I have to devote more time to the family. I think that contains the essentials, of the proposal of one of the team leaders who was really doing a lot of work and precisely just had too much work, and he felt that the time that he spent with his wife and his children were being affected negatively. Okay, so he brought this up with this person, and to his surprise, that his boss told him, I understand what you mean, because I also find myself in that situation, and for me, family, my relationship with my wife and my kids are very important, because after all, if I'm working here, it's for them, right? So to his surprise, that was the response of the boss. Okay, let's see your work schedule. So how many? In other words, he took that input in. He said, "Well, I understand what you're saying. I see things the same way you do, and let's try to solve things. How can we work this out?" And so that's an example of one way to approach this situation. Of course, that the answer was given because this person had a view of work, in keeping with those principles I told you about the Christian understanding of man.
Okay. Any other Catholic ethical principles that you may add, for instance, that are, say, universally applicable for any business?
Well, I would say that truth is very important, right? To be upfront, to be transparent.
Yes, in fact, among the more popular corporate values or core values cited in the value statement of companies is the values of integrity, honesty.
Yes, I would also, point out, like in work relationships, of course, you have goals to meet, you have deadlines to meet, um, and um, and and there's an audit, to face. Okay, of course, these are the results, right? That and you want to deliver the goods. But another point that we should keep in mind is that we're dealing with persons. Okay, so in our work relationships, that's very important. There are many ways of delivering a message or writing a memo, or the perspective you give to a certain issue, like this person who brought up the problem of his too much work. That's very important. The way we speak, the way we communicate, the words that we use. These may seem trivial, but they're very important. Okay, our facial expression is also body language. Like if I am so provoked, about something, and I'm not calm, I better be careful, because if I start talking with you, my anger just come out. So I think that's fundamental, because I can work very well, but working very well also means knowing how to work with people, knowing how to work as a team, co-sharing the responsibility of moving together.
Well, that's basically Christian charity, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
Valuing the person as a person, not just as a typist, not just as an analyst, but valuing the person as a person.
Mhm.
So even in the evaluation that a manager has to give, and he has to give evaluations, and he has to be objective about that. Still that must be considered. The person I'm evaluating is a person, and he deserves the respect and the dignity that he has as a person.
Hmm. Well, perhaps one thing which I'd also like to bring up is let's say, the value of generosity, for instance, when it comes to taking care of people, not just in terms of relationships, but in terms of compensation, for instance, also. Like, some people may feel that they're working too much, but they're not paid enough, or that they're not paid justly. Well, what could you say about
Yes,
this?
that's very important too. The proper remuneration of a person. Like I know of an entrepreneur. He has several businesses. Okay, and 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 in the company he runs, you know, there's constant training, so that's very important. Training in everything, in the way you work, the way you service the clients, the way you dress, even the way you speak. So, in other words, the human component is there. Okay, so that dimension of the person is taken into account.